Okay, we now have Andriana Gosiva from GISA, who is the pilot project officer, to present us GISA's pilot integration project. Andriana.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so GISA decided to participate in this project, taking into consideration the specific context that exists, both on a local but also on a European level. As we heard from the speech in the morning on the behalf of the EU, they said that in light of the late tragedies, as they called them in the Mediterranean, the EU decided to publish a new agenda on migration issues. And they announced the 4 pillars of their agenda. According to them, the first pillar is to reduce the incentives of irregular migration. So this is something which does not take into consideration, of course, migrants' lives or integration or whatever, but it aims to stop migration flows in EU and to stop migrants from coming in the EU. The second pillar is to strengthen Frontex with the excuse to secure borders of the nation states. And then justification for this decision is smuggling and trafficking, which occurs along with migration. Of course, what they failed to take into consideration, and I don't believe that this is by accident, is the fact that when you stop the so-called smugglers and traffickers, you also stop migrants who come to migrate, and not only stop them, but actually kill them. And then we speak of these tragedies. But are they tragedies or are they murders in reality? Their third pillar is asylum policies. And the focus of the asylum policies is to strengthen and to strengthen the Dublin regulation, which again is an objective which aims to stop migration, to stop refugees in particular in this case from entering EU, and to help EU member states that are in the center of Europe to not to have the burden of refugees, as they call it. The fourth pillar is, as they say, is a new policy on migration and integration. Even in the speech in the morning, we didn't hear much about this. It's the pillar which has the less focus of the EU. They speak very vaguely about the new policy on migration and integration issues, but nothing in specific. I mean, nobody knows what is this specific new migration policy. They speak about an integration plan which includes the improving of migrants' abilities, to improve the language abilities of migrants, to improve the vocational abilities of migrants, etc. So the burden is again on migrants to integrate in Europe. It's like the member states and the EU in general have no obligation or responsibility to facilitate the integration of migrants and to take into consideration what we heard from Erna as well in the morning, that integration should be a two-way process actually, and not something that should burden migrants alone and leave the nation states without any responsibility. And what is lacking in all these 4 pillars of the policy of EU, of the migration policy of EU, is of course the migrants' perspective. We never heard of any migrants' voices there. We never heard of any consultation with migrants on developing EU's migration policy. It's like we are talking about migrants, but migrants are not there. We are taking decisions for them, for their lives, and even for their own deaths, not only for their lives, but we never consult them or even ask them to give us their positions and how they think that integration should take process. And this is also a reality not only in the EU in general context, but in the context of the nation states and of Cyprus in particular in this case. We heard the representative of the Minister of Interior in the morning in the reading the speech of the minister. Again, we talk a lot about integration, about migration policies, about asylum policies even. They said that they are very decisive to take into consideration NGOs' perspectives, and I hope they will, because up to now, from our experience, this is not the case, unfortunately. But again, there is a lack of migrants' voices. Nobody ever talks about inviting those migrants for whom we talk about to discuss with them and to take decisions about them with them. Migrants are always missing from the context, although we speak about them. So the specific context of Cyprus. In Cyprus, according to the Eurostat statistics, the 23.2% of the total population of Cyprus in 2013 was migrants, and third country nationals made 6.6% of the total population. We have to take into consideration here that although we lack statistics about this, migrant women is the vast majority of migrants in Cyprus. And when we speak about migrants who come with work permit, again, migrant women is the vast majority of migrants. And they are usually, almost all of them, they come as domestic workers. Why? Because the migration policy of Cyprus says that third country migrants have access to employment only in the domestic work and in the farming and agriculture. So domestic work is reserved for migrant women because of various reasons. Patriarchy, the main of them, is the main reason for this. Because we consider that domestic work is a women's issue, and because we consider that in a society like Cyprus, that we like to say that we encourage our women, which meaning Cypriot women, of course, to become active participants in the employment sector, and in the total lack and total absence of any policies on behalf of the government to support the participation of women in the labor market, having, for example, daycare services for children or for elderly people, for dependents in general. We don't have any of them. So the solution we found in this is to have to allow Cypriot families to bring migrant women in Cyprus to be domestic workers, so as to take care of our own children, of our own elderly persons, of our own dependents, and then boast about big numbers of women's participation in the labor market among you. These women, they come with very low salaries. The salary, according to the government, right now, the net salary of domestic workers is €309. I believe that the gross salary is 420, by the way. Can you imagine? The social securities take 1/3 of the salary, actually, of migrant women. So we have them with this salary to work in our houses. They live in the houses because the excuse of the government that they fix such a low salary for domestic employer has to provide housing and food, which, however, means that they work 24 hours a day because, as you can imagine, when you live in your employment space, you hardly have any off, you hardly have any free time. And this is the mentality of Cypriot employers as well, actually, that what they usually say is that I brought you to come here to take care of my children and or of my elderly people, and because these either children or elderly people, they cannot support themselves. They need 24-hour care services. They think that they take it for granted that domestic workers should be there to work 24 hours a day, basically. And this is not only the mentality of the Cypriot employers, but this is also the mentality of the authorities, because from our experience, GISA runs a services center for migrants and refugees. From our experience, when sometimes, for example, we go with the people to the labor department when they have labor complaints to support them in their interviews, because the labor department, when you submit a labor complaint, they call for a hearing, the employer and the employee. And there is also an officer of the labor department there to facilitate the hearing and to take a decision on what will happen. So what we hear from the officers of the labor department as well, when the migrant domestic workers complained that they work 24 hours a day, is this again, that, but this is your job. I mean, you came as a domestic worker, you knew from before that you will come to take care of a baby or to take care of an elderly person. So it goes without saying that you have to work 24 hours a day. Although the employment contract says 7 hours a day, 6 days a week. But this is just in theory, nothing else. And speaking about the employment contracts, a very important factor is that the employment contracts of domestic workers come from the Minister of Interior and not the Minister of Labor, which is responsible for any other employment sector in Cyprus. The only exception to this is domestic work. Why? Because actually we don't consider domestic work to be employment, and we heard this officially from ministers of labor before, that, this is reproduction, it's not actually labor. So it's under the Ministry of Interior and not under the Ministry of Labor, which means a lot, I think. It means a lot, both about the racism in Cypriot society and by the Cypriot government as well, but also the sexism, because this is the reason there is this idea is because domestic work is connected to women, and we believe that the job that women do in the house is not actually work. It's something. And the term we have actually for domestic workers in Cyprus is not domestic workers, but domestic helpers. And this is the term used until very recently in all the official documents for domestic workers, domestic helpers. So it's not work. They help us to do something which we are supposed to do, but we cannot. But the migration model in Cyprus is strict not only for third country nationals, but also even for the members of the family of EU or Cypriot citizens. For example, the requirement to get a resident permit as a member of family of an EU or an Cypriot citizen is to be employed in Cyprus. Or if you are not employed, your Cypriot husband or wife should be employed and take assume responsibility for your expenses and your living in Cyprus. And in order to get a resident permit as a member of a Cyprus or an EU citizen in Cyprus, there are two ways. The first way is if you have employment and you present an employment contract, along with the signature of your Cypriot or European spouse, which confirms that they want you to stay here, actually. And the second way, if you don't have any employment contract, is, as I said before, for your spouse to assume responsibility for your expenses, and you are being issued a resident permit as a visitor. And we have people who live in Cyprus for 30 years, as visitors. Quite a long visit, I must say. I mean, there is no other way to get any other resident permit in Cyprus. You can imagine that when you force people to get a signature from their spouses in order to get their resident permit, you made them completely independent on their spouses. And this is especially true for migrant women in particular, because of the reasons we said before, not only of racism, but of sexism as well. And for this reason, we have many migrant women that they are married to Cypriot citizens, some or EU citizens. Some of them, they even have children with them. They live together, but they don't have a resident permit because their spouse does not consent to sign for a resident permit. Why? Because in this way, they can keep them in their hand, as we say. They can do, they live with the constant threat that your stay here depends on me. So if you complained against me, if you complained about the violence you experienced from me, if you complained about anything against me, you are out of here. I can deport you. This is the situation. Another category of migrants we have in Cyprus is students, that they come to study in universities or in colleges, private ones, because migrants actually do not have actual access to the public university in Cyprus. They may have in theory, but in practice it's very, very difficult to get a seat in the public university as a migrant. So they have to pay a lot of money to agents to find them universities and colleges to come here. We have a lot of colleges that they get permission from the Ministry of Education to operate as colleges, but in the reality, they are ghosts, they don't exist. And of course, all this happens with the tolerance and not only the tolerance, the permission, I would say, of the Cypriot government, because everybody knows what's going on. But I think it's convenient for everybody, and especially for the state, to maintain this situation and not to change it. The refugees is the other main category of migrants in Cyprus. But you all know, I think, the difficulties. It's part of what we said also before about the EU policy with border control, etc. The government of Cyprus in particular, especially now amidst the economic crisis, they found it as an excuse, the economic crisis, in order to cut the benefits of the refugees and to force them into a very desperate situation. Why? In order to force them to leave from Cyprus, and in order to discourage new refugees from coming in Cyprus, because of course, refugees who are in their countries now and they think they want to reach Europe, if they have relatives or friends in some EU country, they speak with them to see what are the conditions, and of course the word goes that no, don't come to Cyprus because you don't have a choice to live actually here. You don't have access to public benefits, you don't have access to a lot of basic human rights, and you are forced to leave because you don't have access to employment either, actually. The first 6 months, asylum seekers are without access to employment at all, and after 6 months, they are allowed to work only in the agriculture field again, with the salary of 340 net, I think. Can you imagine having a family and having to support your family with 340 euro, and especially in Cyprus? The rent in Cyprus, to rent a house or a flat for a family is more than 350 euro to rent a decent place. If your salary is 340, how is it possible to live? And if you work, you are not entitled to any other reception conditions. So this is the situation. Yes. What we decided to do with Integro, we already knew these difficulties and these problems that migrants face in Cyprus. We already knew the realities. But we did a mapping exercise. We knew it from our experience with the services center, etc. We did a mapping exercise, which actually confirmed this situation. And we thought that what is important to happen in Cyprus is to have to promote the self-organization of migrants, because in this situation you can imagine that migrants are disempowered, and as a result they are marginalized, and as a result they don't have much representation, and their communities are not very much, the migrant communities in Cyprus are not very much organized. So we decided to do something regarding the self-organization of migrants in Cyprus. We did the mapping exercise, as I said before. We called also 2 stakeholders meetings and 2 roundtable discussions to discuss with migrants. Sorry, 1 minute. Yes, to discuss with migrants, but also with the other stakeholders like women's groups, trade unions, local authorities, think tanks, NGOs, the government, independent bodies, academics, as well as activists, to discuss what are the needs of migrants right now and how we should proceed more specifically with our pilot project. From these meetings, the result was that there is a need for a forum of migrant women in particular, so as to strengthen the participation of migrant women in the Cypriot society, who are particularly vulnerable, as I said before. So the aims of the pilot project are the self-representation of migrant women, empowerment of migrant women, active participation of migrant women in all spheres of public life, which should all include full and equal participation in the labor market, education, but most importantly, maybe political participation, especially in the formulation and implementation of integration measures and policies. Because as I said before, and as we saw from the speech of the Minister of Interior in the morning, migrants are completely absent from any integration measures and policies and discussions around them in Cyprus. Another aim is to build the capacity of migrant women in order to enable them to be a key stakeholder in the field of integration, accessing their rights to long-term resident status and citizenship in particular, because those long-term resident status and citizenship are something that we have only in theory in Cyprus, again, for migrants. It's not something that, I mean, if you see the statistics of the ministry, the long-term resident status has been given almost to non-migrant up to now, whereas citizenship is usually given only to migrant women who are married and have families with Cypriot citizens, and to rich people, because we have also a new policy now that if you have bank accounts of 2 million, you are entitled to citizenship without any other requirements. If you are a migrant who lives and works and has family here for 30 years, you are a visitor. But if you are somebody who has sufficient bank deposits, then you can get the Cypriot citizenship without any other requirement. And I think that in EU is also only Cyprus and Malta which who have has also a similar policy. So continuing with the aims of the pilot project is to support migrant women in becoming aware of and claiming their rights, because a huge difficulty we have is that because of the exclusion of migrants and migrant women in particular, most migrant women are not aware of their rights. In many cases, they face serious violations of their rights, and they don't know that there are laws to protect them and there are ways to claim their rights. Another aim is to promote the self-organization of migrant women, so as to make them able to represent themselves and claiming their rights. To create a sustainable and empowering community for migrant women. Fight to stop the exploitation of domestic workers and other female migrant workers, applying anti-discrimination law and policies in employment. Improve the working and living conditions of migrant women, including respect to family life and the right to family reunion. And raise awareness about and fight to stop multiple discrimination and gendered violence against migrant women. All these aims have been developed, as I said before, in discussion with migrants and migrant women in particular, but also taking a special consideration the NR principles as developed in the NR toolkit. The innovation of the pilot project that GISAN decided to implement is the fact that we decided to promote the empowerment of migrant women to become active community members, both in their own migrant communities and also in the Cypriot society as a whole, through self-representation. And also the fact that the pilot project has an intersectional approach, which means that we take into consideration that migrant women are migrants and also women. So the migratory background is not the only aspect that we focus. Gender is also an aspect we focus in our pilot project. And apart from this, we also take into consideration several other characteristics that migrant women may have, like sexual orientation, gender identity, disability status, etc. Okay, so yes, I already discussed about this. The challenges we faced while implementing our pilot project. The greatest difficulty, I think, was that it's difficult for migrant women in Cyprus to attend meetings or discussions, seminars, etc., because of the conditions that we discussed before. Because most of them, they work as domestic workers, so they have to live in the house, and usually they are not allowed to leave from the house at any point in the day. They are, according to their contracts, they have an off every Sunday, but this is something that not all employers respect. So the way we thought to come to a solution to this was that we tried to schedule most of the meetings at seminars, etc., and the trainings on Sundays, so as to make it possible for as many women as possible to attend meetings. Again, I'm sure that we know for sure that a lot of migrant women could not attend either because they could not even get their day off on Sunday, or because for some women, for example, women who have families, it's more difficult to live on a Sunday, that it's a day that they usually spend with their families. But it was the only way to ensure the maximum participation of migrant women possible. Because we are continuing with the project. I mean, the fact that Integro has finished doesn't mean that for us that the pilot project is also finished. What we are planning to do, what we are doing is that in the following meetings, etc., we try to make most of them on Sundays, but also to have some of them on other weekdays, so as to make it possible for other women who cannot attend meetings on Sunday to come to some of the meetings. Another difficulty we had to face is that because of the strong patriarchal structures, both within the Cypriot society, but also within migrant communities as well, there is this mentality in the house, and that women should not participate in any public events or discussions, and they should not be facilitated or promoted to self-organize. We had also this difficulty that a lot of migrant women could not participate in the project because they had restrictions even from their families for this. And as a result, unfortunately, there are certain communities that also, although there are a lot of migrant women from these communities in Cyprus, they are not represented or they are underrepresented in the Migrant Women's Forum because of this situation. We are working with this, we are working with the migrant communities to try to change the mentality about this issue, and we are hoping that at some point we will manage to overcome this. Another difficulty is that because most women, and especially women who have families in Cyprus and they have children or other dependents, it's difficult for them again to attend meetings because of their dependents. The solution we found to this was that we try in every meeting or seminar or whatever we have through the project to provide childcare services at least. So as we have somebody who is responsible to take care of the children and to plan some activities with the children while the women participate in the work of the project. Another difficulty we have is the state authorities, which I believe is something which was common in most countries, as we could hear. There was a difficulty to convince the authorities that this project is important and that they should support it, and difficulty to convince them to participate even in the meetings, the stakeholder meetings, the roundtable discussions, etc., that we did through the pilot project. And this was particularly difficult when we had meetings that were planned in non-working hours for the government sector. So we tried to organize the most official meetings, etc., on working days to ensure the participation of the authorities, which of course created further complications, combined with what I said before, that most migrant women, it's difficult to attend meetings on weekdays. The other difficulty we faced was working language. We chose the working language of the pilot project to be English because, of course, migrant women come from various communities, and the only common language we could find was English, so as for all of us to be able to communicate with each other and to work together. Unfortunately, of course, not all of migrant women in Cyprus speak English, or some of them, they speak English, but their knowledge of English is not so good to work in meetings, etc. So some of them could not participate in the project because of the language barrier. And the last challenge we faced in the program was that because of the fact that migrants and migrant women in particular are marginalized in the society, and as I said before, their communities are not very well organized. Migrant women who participate in the project most of them do not have a long organizational experience from before, so as to build on that for the project. So we had to begin from the beginning with this. And this is something which makes self-representation difficult, of course, but on the other hand, it's a challenge that it's feasible to overcome because we did trainings, etc. So, I mean, okay, we didn't have the knowledge there to build on that, but we could establish knowledge now. So what we did with the Migrant Women's Forum more specifically during the implementation period was to set up the Migrant Women's Forum, to work in order to establish new bonds and maintain the bonds which already existed with the migrant communities. We held several discussions with migrant women and their communities in order to formulate the aims and objectives of the forum, to develop an action plan, to plan the forum's sustainability beyond the pilot project, because as I said before, one of our priorities is that we don't want the forum to stop existing when the Integro program is finished. Our aspiration is that it will continue to, and it will be strengthened actually after Integro. And in order to have a strong political character for the forum, because we consider this to be very important for the advocacy work of the forum. We also had training, seminars, workshops, and we organized the first annual assembly of the forum. From all these discussions, etc., what came up was that because migrant women come from various backgrounds, some of them work, some of them have families, they face different problems in the society. Not all of them have the same experiences or the same problems or the same priorities. So the need emerged from this that we should have 3 working groups within the forum to work with the different areas of priority areas. So with the discussion we had with the migrant women of the forum, they expressed interest for the time being to form 3 different working groups, one on social and labor rights, one on violence, and one on family. And what we said is that these are the priority areas for now. It doesn't mean that it will stay like this forever. I mean, at any point when the migrant women who participate in the forum feel the need that there is something, there is another priority area which emerged right now, they can form another working group, or if they feel that one of these 3 priority areas is not a priority for them anymore, they can, of course, dissolve that specific working group. And within the working groups, each working group set their own priority areas again, because again, social and labor rights, for example, is a very big, a very broad area, and there are a lot of problems faced by migrant women regarding this field. So what they said is that for the time being, their priority areas in this working group is access to state benefits, including the access to social insurance benefit, because although what I said before that 1/3 of the salaries of domestic migrant workers goes to the social insurance contributions, however, they don't have access to any insurance benefit. I mean, they cannot get unemployment benefit, they cannot get pension, they cannot. So this is a priority for them. The priority set in the working group for violence issues is that they should work towards access of undocumented migrant women to reporting mechanisms and to support and protection services, because right now the problem we have with undocumented migrant women is that when they face violence, they feel that they cannot go to any authorities to report the violence they experience, because when you approach any authority, and especially the police, the first thing they will ask from you is your resident permit, and if you don't have one, from a victim you become a perpetrator for the system, and you end up in detention and deported. So this is a priority for the working group, and along with this, another priority is to recognize violence experienced by domestic workers as domestic violence. Because right now, the law we have on domestic violence does recognize in theory again that violence experienced by domestic workers who live in the house falls under its capacity under domestic violence law. But in practice, the authorities never recognize this. So when a domestic worker goes to report violence against them by their employer, it's never recognized as domestic violence. But on the other hand, when an employer goes to report violence by their domestic worker, it is recognized as domestic violence, and then domestic worker is persecuted under the domestic violence law. So for this reason, these are the priorities set in the working group on violence. And lastly, the priority set on the working group which works on family issues is to work with the issues that undocumented migrant families face in Cyprus, because as undocumented migrants, they really don't have access either to basic human rights like health, education in many cases, employment, state benefits, welfare, etc. And the meetings of the working groups resulted in developing the action plans for each working group. And this is the stage we are now, to implement the action plan of each working group so as to continue the work of the forum. And this is the end of my presentation, I think. Here we have some photos from the meetings we had and the trainings, etc. Thank you.
Adriana, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sorry I won't allow any questions now, rather arbitrarily, but the time, we are a bit behind time, so I will ask the representative of Citizens for Europe to present the pilot project, please.
Somebody see the microphone that you can walk around with.
Ah. Oh my.
Is it on? Okay, good morning, everybody. Or good afternoon. Actually, it's foreseen that in 10 minutes is lunch. So I hope you still have the energy to stay a little bit with us. My name is Martin. I'm from an activist office in Berlin called Citizens. Actually, I have no idea to whom I'm talking to. I know some of the colleagues of Integro project, but there are so many more people, and I have no idea who are you and why are you actually here. Perhaps half of you ask yourself why you're here. So actually, I want to just have a little raise of hands. Who are those people who are here today are not part of this Integro project? How many guests do we have here? Look, there's a lot. There's a lot. That's almost half of the people. And I think we should take care a little bit about this half of the people. So first of all, again, this group. How many of you are coming from governmental sector or public sector? Okay, may I quickly ask you, where are you from?
Society Integration Foundation in Latvia.
Okay. That's a public fund?
It's a very tricky status. We are a public institution, but it's like established by government, but we are operating as sort of NGO. Like, it's very different in activity.
Were you able to connect a little bit with the content that was delivered so far? Or was it?
Yeah, we are, sorry, I'm taking over, but no, but that's easier for me. Yeah. No, but it's hard. We are, in Latvia, government took decision by some of ministries to establish such a foundation. But our actions are not really funded by state. So we had to look in terms of discrimination, diversity, immigration, we had to look for the funds around. Right. And we are working within the projects as you are here, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Who of you from the guests are working in the private sector? Even you? Okay. Who's working in the civil society sector? of you who are here from as guests? Civil society sector. So there's a lot of hands I didn't see. What are you doing then? If you're not profit, civil society, or who was the external guest who didn't raise his hand? You? You did. And that was?
Public sector. You haven't seen me before, probably.
No, probably. Ah, that's you again. Sorry, that's your face. Ah, yeah. No, because you got smaller in your chair, so I thought, okay, let's get this guy again. Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, so I will not take your 50 minutes to listen to another story, but I'll want to just give you a little example of what is the story in Berlin. Oh, what's that issue? Okay, I'll try it again. So in Berlin, as I said, Citizens for Europe is an activist office. We are not a membership organization. We don't have a board. We don't have memberships gatherings. We are an international crowd of young professionals from around the world that trigger change, social change in the city of Berlin and many other areas across Europe. So I'm just trying to get this running. I don't know whether the internet connection is available. Okay. Well, the issue in Berlin, I'll just keep walking and telling you. The issue in Berlin is voting rights. That's an issue that we work on since 2011, and it's mainly about the political participation rights of non-nationals in Germany. So you might think, why do you talk about voting rights? I mean, we just heard a story of government-led modern form of slavery. That is, I mean, what you described in Cyprus is what I would call government-organized modern form of slavery. Isn't voting rights too small issue? When we have racism, when we have discrimination, isn't like access to labor market, access to education, isn't that much more valuable than voting rights? Well, all you have, the policies you might claim your rights with, and you said you want to train migrant women to claim the rights, but their right is like to have 350 euros a month. So what right is that you want to claim? That's ridiculous. So you need to change the policies. So the way we try to promote a change is kind of from top down to trigger a change in policy in the way that migrants get the rights to vote, and with that try to influence what is actually being debated in parliament, in governmental circles, and what is coming into policy. So I think this thing is not working, is it? Are you the technician? May I ask you to just to check with the? It's. You think it's a different issue? Okay. Okay. It doesn't make much sense if I don't have a presentation. Look, what about, I mean, is it possible to have lunch now, do the presentation thereafter, and we change later to the discussion? I mean, also depending on the energy of you, but I don't get this thing running. It was running like 2 minutes ago. I mean, and lunch is organized. They don't probably want you to wait another. Our organization.
No. Those
external.
outside.
Okay.
Sorry, I was pointed out that we are
So the presentation
supposed
is working
to have
now, but-
lunch at 12:50 anyway. I thought it was a bit later, but no. Do you want to continue?
You think? Okay, then let's do that. Later in the afternoon, we're also going to go back a little bit to the audience. Usually there's more knowledge in the audience than the person who speaks in front of it. And we want to tap a little bit that knowledge that is with you as well and get to know a little bit more about who are you. So let's go to the city of Berlin. Within the city of Berlin, we look at a quite vibrant population and colorful population. The project that we initiated or triggered was called Wahlrecht für alle, Voting Rights for All, and it was a campaign. So we also had meetings, but what we did was mainly going out on the streets and making noise. And we do that with a lot of partners, and I come to that later on. So let's have a look a little bit on the German situation altogether. In Germany, we have about 21% of the entire population, our so-called migrant population. In Germany, about 9% of those people don't have a German passport. Again, half of those people are called third country nationals. Though in the project, we don't distinguish in our public communication a difference between third country nationals and EU citizens. I'll tell you why, because the case of Berlin is pretty awkward. When we look at the development of Germany, in the second year in a row, after the United States, Germany was the second largest country receiving newcomers from outside. Last year in 2014, we almost had 1 million people coming to Germany. So after the US, the second biggest country. Most of those people, 85%, move into cities. So our cities becoming much more diverse. Over the last 10 years already, in some cities, the migrant population makes more than 50% in some German cities. And I'll brought you like a little overview of the migrant in cities and the political representation. So, for example, in the city of Heilbronn, southwest of Germany, 44% of the city population are migrants. You can consider that half of them, again, non-nationals, and half of that, again, third country nationals. But in the political gremium, like in the city parliament, 0% of the members have a migrant background. Same with Ingolstadt, 40% migrant population, 0% in the political sphere. Mannheim, 33%. Berlin has about 25% migration background and about 3% in the local government. But we're not talking about representation in political parties, we talk about voting rights. So the development over the next 10 years will dramatically increase that there will be much more people coming from outside into Germany, and most of them will go into cities. The cities will grow, the cities will become much more diverse, the population will be much, much more colorful. So what is the situation now in Berlin? Berlin is, on the continent of Europe, the second biggest Turkish city after Istanbul. Second Turkish city on the continent with about 120,000 Turkish citizens in Berlin. We have about 20,000 people from Serbia. We have about 17,000 people from Russia, 15,000 people from Vietnam, 14,000 from United States, 25,000 black Africans. So there's the communities are like it's not like one single migrant community in Berlin. The Turkish, of course, are the biggest, followed by Polish, but they're EU citizens. But it's a broad variety of different communities across Berlin. If we look at voting rights in Europe, there's more countries in the European Union that grant voting rights to third country nationals and non-nationals that there aren't. So all the Benelux countries, all the Nordic countries, all the Baltic countries, even Hungary, the Netherlands, all these countries grant voting rights for third country nationals, at least at the local level. Most advanced is the UK. The UK even grants voting rights at national level to some third country nationals, and in some countries, third country nationals can even stand in the elections. In Germany, we don't have any of that. The city of Berlin actually is not only a city, it's a county, or it's a regional government building. And as a regional government entity, neither EU citizens nor third country nationals have voting rights. So imagine that every sixth person in Berlin does not have the right to participate in political elections or citizen referendum or any of the other political instruments that are out there. It's every sixth person. So the voting right issue in Germany started in the 70s, so with the first big income of newcomers that we called Gastarbeiter in the 60s and 70s. They already started to think of, like, why don't we have a political voting right? I mean, we pay tax, we pay here, our kids go to school, go to kindergarten. I mean, we're some kind full-fledged citizen, but we're not allowed to take a stake in the political debate, become party leaders, even have election rights. In '92, the Maastricht Treaty introduced voting rights for EU citizens. That was a big shift in German legislation, and from one day to the other, non-nationals had the right to vote, at least in local elections and European elections. And some cities in Germany also tried to introduce now voting rights for third country nationals. That was unfortunately blocked. The city of Bremen, the city of Hamburg, and the city of Berlin, they tried to do in '92, but that was blocked by the German Constitutional Court, who said the power, the political power, only comes from the people and being interpreted by the people are Germans. And this is still the status quo. So our Constitutional Court and constitutional courts of the cities and Länder still have the interpretation that the democratic power comes from the people, but it's necessary that these people are German. And this is like stigmatizing a lot of part of the population, and there's not really a way out. So what did we try to do? We tried to run a big campaign in Berlin on promoting voting rights. And we did that in a context of, in May last year, we had the European elections. In May last year, we had a big referenda in Berlin on the development of an airport that concerned a lot of people. And at the same time, we had the city of Bremen and the Social Democratic Party that tried to introduce, again, voting rights. So we were developing in a context where we had European elections, local, like kind of local election, local referenda, and the city of Bremen that tried to introduce, again, voting rights. Our objective was, in Berlin, to create a self-organized movement. We, as an activist office, we are not the ones standing in front of the line and saying we need voting rights, but we are the ones who trigger that people come together to claim and to force the introduction of new rights. So we wanted to organize or trigger a self-organized movement that, on the first objective, creates public and political pressure to make the population in Berlin aware of the fact that every sixth person in Berlin does not have the right to vote. We also want to inform the public, the majority public, the white German public, with an emotional photo campaign to say, look, your neighbor is not part of the political scene and your neighbor is not able to participate in voting rights. And we wanted to train our stakeholders to challenge the legal debate that is stuck in the issue that the people are only Germans. So the values we had is we believe in chaos theory, we believe in collective intelligence and collective impact, we believe in non-formal education, we believe in non-linear project management. So everything we did was quite ad hoc, and whatever we developed was an answer to the context. So the project didn't follow a strategic project development line, but we had a goal, and we saw like what kind of opportunities are out there to create this goal. So what we came up with, let me just check. What we came up with were several actions. We gathered about 40 different migrant organizations and German organizations around the table to develop an action plan for how to campaign for voting rights in Germany and especially in Berlin. Those were called stakeholder meetings in the language of ENA and in the language of Integro. And we developed a plan to create a big action day on an airport called Tempelhofer Feld. And the Tempelhofer Feld is like an airport that was put down, and now the city of Berlin was asking the population, what should we do with this airport? But again, they didn't ask non-nationals. They didn't ask third country nationals, and they didn't ask EU citizens. But about 50% of the population living around this airport are non-nationals. So we had a democratic process that was completely ridiculous, where people, half of the population that was concerned with this airport didn't have a stake and didn't have the opportunity to participate in elections. So what we did is we run a big street campaign and inviting politicians, migrant organizations, celebrities to have a symbolic election on the day before of the election. So like we had the official election referenda on a Sunday and our campaign was on a Saturday. That allowed us to get media attention quite easily. And we invited celebrities, for example, this is a TV presenter with Turkish background, very famous and private channels and with the youth. And we asked her, would you give out like the Berlin passport? So we created fake Berlin passports, and we gave out passports to every citizen in Berlin, never mind what nationality, to showcase you're a citizen of Berlin. And with that passport that got stamped, it looked quite official, they were able to go then to the symbolic election and participate in a symbolic election. We got a lot of press on that action, both a national and regional newspaper that picked up the story. In Berlin, we talk about Tempelhofer Feld. It was a nationwide topic because everybody was crazy to see like what is Berlin going to do with such a great area in the city center, and the city government had crazy plans to make something very beautiful and expensive housing and expensive library, and the population said, you know what, we just want to have it for our own gardening. And so the population, I mean, the 50% who were able to vote, like put down the government plans, and that was a big shock for Berlin government. And nationwide, it became in media that like a big part of the population is not able to vote. And here in the headline of Tagesspiegel, as a nationwide newspaper, it says, Fatma has no opportunity to vote. Also, a nationwide, no, that's a local newspaper, saying every sixth person is not able to vote about this, what is called Tempelhofer Feld. And we then published an open letter addressing all the parties in Berlin, claiming to move and to introduce voting rights in Berlin. The idea was, once voting rights get introduced at a regional level, we can bring this again in front of the court of justice, and challenge the decision that was made 20 years ago. First of all, there are new judges, there's new social change, and there's new EU legislation. So we were hoping that, like, once we introduce it in Berlin, it might be a butterfly effect and go into other cities as well. We were able, with this open letter that we sent to the city party, to get 4 of 5 parties behind our back. So 4 of the 5 parties that were in parliament said, yes, we see the issue, especially we see like with local elections and regional elections and referenda, it's ridiculous to exclude a big part of the population. So in Berlin, we're up for voting rights. Unfortunately, the Conservatives were against us, and the Conservatives have the majority in the parliament right now. However, what we triggered with the open letter is that one of the biggest politicians from the Social Democrats, the vice president actually, of the Social Democrats, in a big, large German media called Spiegel, one of the most powerful media channels online, started to trigger a debate that even on national level we want to have Ausländerwahlrecht. And Ausländerwahlrecht is like right to vote for non-nationals. And so that triggered like that this vice president of the Social Democrats Germany triggered like this talk, we want to have voting rights, brought a huge debate into Russia, then became completely independent of what we started. But like the campaign in Berlin and the open letter forced people to react. What happened then was quite dramatic. The city of Bremen tried to introduce voting rights again, based also on the campaign in Berlin we did, and said, look, there's several cities across Germany that want to introduce voting rights. Now, as city of Bremen, we do it. And they did it, and they got caught again by the Constitutional Court last year. Completely shock for civil society scene. We would have not believed if one city introduced it that the Court of Justice will block that again, but there's still this old white male pale stale judges that still believe we are in 1970, and that still claimed that in the Constitution, people only refers to Germans and not for the people as population. So we said, gosh, where do we go with our campaign now? Now there is again the highest judgment of a constitutional court to say non-national voting rights are not allowed in Germany. How can we challenge that? So we said, okay, there's no use if we're going to continue with our campaign going out the streets because politicians will tell us our hands are bound. We can't do anything because our constitution doesn't allow it, and we don't have the power to change the constitution with 2/3 of the majority in the national parliament. So we thought, okay, let's perhaps move away from campaign strategies. It was very successful in front of running and managing that a city will introduce it and with the media coverage. But we said, let's challenge the court judgment. So we invited 3 former court judges to give a presentation of the legal framework in Germany concerning voting rights on third country nationals. And we invited about 80 migrant representatives, politicians, to a legal training. So that was the third action after. Let me see again. So that legal training was the third action after the action day and the open letter, and that legal training was very surprising and very boosting. Thank you. Because we met judges and we met lawyers that told a completely different story of the German constitution as those judges of the Constitutional Court would do. So in a 3-hour session, they gave us very good legal arguments and legal instruments how we as civil society scene could proceed in a legal manner to challenge the judgment of those judges. Of course, that's a long-term process, but after this campaign, and we thought we're not going to get anywhere, it was the second boost where legal advisors told us, don't give up, there's actually legal ways, and try to introduce it somewhere else, and we can support you as former judges in making your claims. Followed by that, we went into a last activity, which was an open space, where we talked about how could the future participation in multi-ethnic cities look like. I don't want to go deeper into that. I want to show you a little bit what we did with campaigning and what we're going to continue to do. One result of this campaign was that we started a Facebook campaign where we asked residents in Germany and Berlin that don't have national citizenship to say voting rights for all because. And then we asked them to sign it, make a picture, and put it on Facebook. And we collected several hundred pictures from people across Berlin and even beyond that say, I'm a citizen of Berlin, I want to have voting rights before I pay 5,000 days, I have 2 kids, I'm a teacher. We met people in Berlin that are advising the government in Berlin, but who do not have voting rights. They're advising the government on climate issues, they're advising the government on social mobility, on taxation, but even these people, they're the experts, and they give advice to the government. They don't have voting rights because they hold the wrong nationality. So what we came up with was a very broad Facebook campaign with hundreds of people participating. And this Facebook campaign, here's some pictures of the action day we did at the Tempelhofer Feld. This Facebook campaign then also got, again, picked up by media. And they say, oh, look, there's a lot of people out there that actually make a move, go out the street and claim what they want to do. And this is how we want to continue with a pilot project in Integro, is that we want to create a traveling exhibition. We have, again, elections next year in Berlin. And we want to produce large banners over several hundred meters where we display thousands of people with their "I want to vote, why?" because. And I think that can create, again, a little bit of public pressure in Berlin. So I'm not having now a presentation with listing all the outcomes, but we surely, with our public actions, we reached several thousand people with like this big media strategy and big media campaign, probably several million readers of the large national newspapers. We were able to trigger a debate in the political sphere. We were able to get 4 parties out of 5 in Berlin to back us up. So we are now in a way to identify again what could be a next step to change and to introduce voting rights in Germany. And it probably will need to have a new interpretation of the German constitution. That's a crazy legal process. But with this campaign in Berlin that got nationwide known, we identified many other local campaigns on voting rights of which we never heard of. For example, there's one woman here from the city of, not Erfurt, Erlangen in Bavaria, who said, look, we're working on voting rights since ages. We got to know cities in Freiburg all across Germany that called us and said, hey, this is a great campaign. We're actually doing the same. So what we're thinking now is to get all those different cities on one table and think of a nationwide campaign to speak with one voice and to use a similar design and so on. So that's a concrete outcome of movements across Germany of which we never heard of, and they never heard of us before. But such a big media scale report, we're able to connect all of them. Okay, that's for the moment. Thank you.
I see there are some questions. Yes? No.
Thank you for your presentation. It's a very inspiring project you got there. But I have one question. How did you convince the politicians? I know you didn't go in there and say, oh, well, racism, migrants should have voting rights. This is the right thing to do. What did you tell them? What was your approach? How did you get them on board?
We addressed, first of all, those politicians that themselves had a migrant background and the political parties in Berlin. So they already had like a personal story to the issue. And then we spotted those politicians in the party that were married to a non-national and said, look, guys, your wife or your partner cannot vote in Berlin. Don't you find that's ridiculous? And they would say, yeah, actually, it's ridiculous. I mean, I don't have support in my party, but perhaps I can do something. Then we went to public companies. And like we have a private public company running the transportation. And 2 years ago, there's a TV in this public transport run privately. And this guy was married to again, a non-national. And we went up to the company and said, hey, guy, your wife cannot vote. Don't you find that ridiculous? And he said, yeah, that's quite ridiculous. I give you free airtime on the TV of the public transport, like worth 500,000 euros. So like this, we try to spot the personal stories of these people and then connect our issue with that. Yeah. Again, we did symbolic elections before, and we could show which parties would benefit if migrants would get voting rights. And there are the Green parties, the Social Democrats, and other smaller parties. And we would go with them and say, look, guys, those are your stakeholders and your electorate. If you give them voting rights, you will have a much bigger role in parliament. And everything is about power. So they said, oh, yeah, actually, we never had the data. We didn't know that the non-nationals, for a third of them, would vote for the Social Democrats. They now realized, wow, there's a lot of people out there on the street that actually would vote for us if we can, and we can kick the conservatives. So that's how we got them in a little bit, with a personal story, people who have migrant background on the power story.
So, since I am coming from Germany and I am political city councillor since 10 years, and for the third time I have been then elected last year, and I was the candidate for the European Parliament of the Green Party. And Wahlrecht für alle, also election for all, is that's what I told you before. It was my main target, and it's the target of our party, the Green Party. It's very, very difficult. I am so surprised because I never heard for your organization. Yes, never. And I was in Germany, and I was the only one black woman who has been the candidate for the EU. So I can understand whom you work. And we are working in Berlin too. I am in Berlin too, in the Zentralrat der Afrikanischen Gemeinde, that's the biggest organization of the black people. We never heard that. And it's pity, because if I knew that you were supporting us, maybe everything will be changed. Yes. And I think next time it will be good if you if you invite also the migrant organization. And that's the big problem of Germany, that most of the organization from the civil society don't work with the migrant organization. And as long as you don't work with us, I think it's just speaking like that for the television. Look at all the things in the television. You never see me on the television since 10 years in Germany. 3 times elected, communal is incredible. Or you didn't know that if I wouldn't come to your place and told you I am political woman in Germany, and I think we have to work together if we want to change our country.
Thank you. There you see, and in such a big country, the challenge of communication. I mean, the project Wahlrecht für alle is not run by us. It's run by migrant organizations themselves. Where we are the backbone, like supporting them with like the knowledge we have. But next time for us is 2016 in Berlin. There was another question from, yeah. And then we go for lunch, yes?
Then I have to be very short. Yeah? I'm Alexis from Vienna. We are a media. Come to Vienna, we'll give you the platform. So, Martin, I was very, like usually, expressed for the activities, but I have 2 small questions. The first one, you say that some cities, like Mannheim, somehow, they try to implement this voting right. How is it with the constitution? Didn't they need to change the constitution? How it works? That's the first one. The second one, we learned that in German there is Ausländer Beirat, a kind of foreigners council. And this one was, we learned that they are taking part in all discussion in the parliament everywhere. Is that not a kind of right for foreigners?
So compare the first question. Like those cities I mentioned, especially city of Bremen and Berlin, and also Mannheim, Erlangen, Thüringen, Erfurt, they try to introduce voting rights despite they knew that the German constitution doesn't allow for it. And actually that's not true. The German constitution doesn't say anything of it. It's only an interpretation by judges who say our German institution doesn't allow it. And they did it despite it because they want to challenge this judgment. So, and the city of Bremen was just the first to be encouraged enough to say, we introduce voting rights. That was completely unexpected that the judges, like 20 years later, would come to the same conclusion that the folk, the people, is only Germans. That was a complete slam in the face of all the migrant organizations. Yeah. So that means all the other cities are now backing up. And they go back again and say, sorry, we can't do it because Bremen did and they didn't get far. So the political drive is out. Ausländerbeiräte, they've been very much active in that campaign as well. And even in the Ausländerbeiräte, you have a lot of non-nationals that advise the government, but they themselves as an individual don't have voting rights. Yeah. So it's a right to be part of like an advisory migrant council, but it doesn't give you any further electoral rights as an individual. Well, yes. I think we go for lunch now. Okay, Thank you. I'll be there the next 2 days, of course, to chat with you.